Stick around. It's time now for a look at Storm Watch. We'll take a look at the tropics and then a look at severe weather, which is beginning to plague much of the southeast and also a good chunk of the mid-Atlantic at the present time. Tropic-wise, we'll show you what's happening. And again, it's been rather quiet during the last couple of weeks. That's going to be the trend all through this upcoming weekend. Take a look at the Gulf of Mexico right now in the Western Caribbean. We are talking about lots of blue skies, and again, hardly anything is developing thanks to a huge ridge of high pressure aloft and at the surface, which means sinking air, and that's going to mean the inhibitant, again, of any thunderstorms from developing or trying to organize over the Gulf of Mexico. That's been the story so far, and during the last couple of weeks, just one of the reasons why Florida has been looking at more westerly winds than anything else and some super hot conditions. Looking right now at the Caribbean Sea, and we'll take you right over towards the islands, a weak wave has been developing there, a weak tropical wave, not doing much of anything as far as organization. We can show you that a little bit closer. This is a look at the islands right in through here, and once again, strong shearing southwesterly winds. And you can see the cloud elements zipping on towards the northeast. That's going to inhibit anything from trying to organize here anytime soon as well. So all is quiet on the front right now across the Gulf of Mexico into the Western Caribbean and also along the east coast of the United States. Here's a look at Haiti and also the Dominican Republic and Cuba, and things are very, very quiet here. In contrast to what's happening off the coast of Mexico, this big blob has been very persistent during the last 24-hour period. This could be our second tropical depression of the season for the eastern Pacific Ocean, and chances are this will develop further. A good chance this could be named depression, the second one of the season, by later this afternoon, and probably no later than early morning tomorrow if it continues to look this well and continues to strengthen just a little bit more. Very close right now to being called a tropical depression. Elsewhere across the eastern Pacific right now, things aren't looking all that badly, and you can see once again what happened during the 1997 Atlantic tropical season. Again, it was rather quiet, and we can also show you that as we move along. We can show you what happened during the 1996 tropical season, when again we saw a lot of active weather during a non-El Nino season, which we're going to be entering in right now. Let's get right back to severe weather and talk about what's been happening over the lower 48 during the last 24-hour period. We'll talk about severe weather during this go-around, and again at the top of the hour, we've had some big-time flooding occurring already this morning in parts of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and now developing over Kentucky and Tennessee, with some big-time storms developing over Alabama, northwestern Georgia, and also over southern Tennessee. This is what happened yesterday. You talk about a major severe weather outbreak as far as wind and hail. We did see that across the Midwest. Only 4 confirmed tornado reports as of now. There could have been many more. As soon as Weather Service officials get out there and inspect the damage, we may be adding a few more red triangles, which are confirmed tornado reports on this map by later today. This is the current setup right now. Again, we're looking at a lot of juicy tropical air in the southeastern part of the country, with the front beginning to roll its way southeastward, and also a very weak disturbance beginning to pass through the Tennessee Valley. That's all you need to produce some big-time thunderstorms. And we do have this severe thunderstorm watch out right now until 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time for much of east central and northeastern Alabama and much of central and northern Georgia, again until 6 o'clock Eastern Time. This is the setup right now. You can see the big storms advancing across extreme northern Alabama and much of north central and northwestern Georgia right now, passing into the Atlanta metro area, at least on the north side at the present time. Farther to the east, not much is going on here as we look at the eastern Carolinas, back into the western Carolinas, and much of the state of Virginia. Yes, we do have some rain, some embedded very intense thunderstorms that look like they're now approaching Norfolk, Virginia, or just southwest of there. Looks like some heavier rainfall around Richmond, and of course the heavy weather along Interstate 75 southbound and northbound from Atlanta up towards Chattanooga. Otherwise, for the rest of the country, it doesn't look all that bad.
Well, coming up shortly on Storm Watch, we'll talk more about severe thunderstorms across the southeast, and we have a new severe weather watch for western Texas. Let me start with the tropics. We do have a new tropical depression out there, and what we're looking at is essentially, first of all, the Atlantic picture here with our streamlines, and this is telling us what the winds high in the atmosphere, way up around 40,000 feet look like. And generally, as we look out across the Caribbean Sea, we see southwesterly winds. Those winds essentially protect the Caribbean, because what we're looking at now from the west coast of Africa all the way out across the tropical waters, a ridge of high pressure that is becoming more favorable for development, especially that south side of the high. So the intertropical convergence zone, some of the tropical waves starting to build up some. But what would happen even if they did is that they would hit these westerly winds, the storms would be built up and then ripped apart, wind shear, as they head toward the islands. Here's our satellite photograph. The Caribbean looking real nice today, good deal of sunshine. Over to Puerto Rico, almost no thunderstorms today, a couple over toward Jamaica, one or two nearby the Caymans Bay Islands, looking wonderful today. So the primary areas that we watched during the month of June, the Gulf of Mexico and the Northwest Caribbean Sea, looking great today. In fact, a little bit of facts and figures is that once in every other year, that's when you'll find a tropical storm form. So during the month of June, chances of a tropical storm are not that good. Over toward the eastern islands, we have the Lesser Antilles here, Leeward Islands, the Windward Islands, the Windwards, seeing some rain today. Nothing organized here. It's with a tropical wave making its way out across the Caribbean Sea. So a few clouds, some showers, nothing organized. Likewise with this huge blob of clouds here, very active showers there, nothing organized. The wind's aloft coming in from the southwest, so even if it were trying to get its act together and it's not, we would be looking at that falling apart anyhow. So increasing clouds is about what we're looking for. Hurricanes per 100 years during the month of June, we're way on down the scale of practically nothing. Peaks out in September. And speaking about the peaks out and things of that nature, this is where we're looking at the coastal waters of about the average when you have a hurricane hit the coast within about 85 miles. Most prone areas, South Florida, also the eastern coast of North Carolina as well as Louisiana. But one thing I'd like to point out, it doesn't matter where you live, from Maine all the way down to Florida, over to Texas, you're still prone to seeing a hurricane make landfall. Some areas much more frequently than others. Well, as we jump on over toward the Pacific, here's the latest information. Tropical Depression number 2 of the Eastern Pacific, that's what the E stands for, so far this season. Top sustained winds, 35. 39, that is tropical storm strength, so this is likely to become a tropical storm over the next 24-36 hours as it churns its way off to the northwest-northwest at 17. The satellite picture showing the cluster that we continue to watch, and that's centered right in through here. Actually, there may be a low-level center and then something a little bit higher up in a different area, but overall, this is what we're looking at, this little cluster right in through here, and it has made that criteria for persistence. You look for at least 12 hours, if not 24. And this is holding together pretty well as it turns its way off the coast of Mexico. As we look back to the states, this is the way it's looking out there. We have a front making its way through the Midwest. Very inactive, the north end, and sometimes what happens is when you have a massive cluster of storms like this, it sort of sucks in all that moisture there. That's where it's all focused. That happens quite often if there's a front making its way down to the southeast, for instance, and sometimes you'll have a cluster out of the Gulf of Mexico, and they will take in all that moisture. So that has been the big story today from Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, some storms in North Carolina. The severe weather threat through midnight, the threat is now over with essentially out across areas of the Ohio Valley, down to the Appalachians, down toward the coast of Florida though. Even if there's storms, rain is welcome. It's been very dry in the state of Florida. There's been, of course, the wildfires. We still have bits and pieces of watches, and which is not out, I'd like to mention there's a new severe weather watch for West Texas. We should have that available.
Thanks for joining us and good evening. I'm Sharon Results, and it is time now to take a look at Storm Watch. In just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some very strong storms moving towards St. Louis. Before that, though, we're going to take a peek at the tropics and see what's happening in the Atlantic and in the Pacific. We'll start you out first with a look at the Atlantic Basin. And obviously not a whole lot happening here, but enough that we can at least cover some mileage here and talk a little bit about the Atlantic Basin. A few waves are moving in from the eastern Atlantic, but each one of these, it progresses on westward, eventually runs into some stronger winds that literally pull it apart. This is not really a favorable area for development this early in the hurricane season. Typically, we would tend to look into the southwestern Caribbean and extend on into the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing happening in that region. As we head into the Gulf of Mexico, the subtropical high continues to affect that region, and so we have a lot of subsidence or sinking air, and as you can see, not much cloudiness to deal with. Upper level trough here, so we are finding a few clouds, but as long as you have an upper level trough, that's not really conducive for development. So we're not too concerned about the Caribbean at this point in time. Very usual or very par for the course to find thunderstorms popping up over the land masses as they heat up throughout the course of the day. That's what we've seen over Hispaniola and on over Cuba, and even for a little period of time there around the Bahamas. But that's about all we're finding as we go that far westward. Little tropical waves continue to try and work their way on westward, but again they encounter the shear, and you can see evidence of that shear pulling apart the higher cloud tops there and pushing them off to the north and to the east. Well, when do we expect to find more development? Typically, we find a peak in the hurricane season right around September 10th. So we kind of start things out usually on the slow side. Then by August, we start to see a few more storms or hurricanes developing, and then by September 10th, that is usually the peak. Sometimes we see another little peak there into early October. But typically, as we reach into early September, we start to see a little more activity in and around the tropical Atlantic. Well, we've already showed you when you might expect to find more activity out there as far as the tropics are concerned. Who might be affected by that? The answer is anyone living along the coast. Really, anyone living along the coast here, from the northeast all the way down across the coastal areas of Florida and extending along the Gulf Coast down toward Brownsville, Texas. Anyone here is vulnerable to a hurricane. What we've done here is paint in the oranges and reds the areas that might see a higher frequency of hurricanes passing within 85 miles. And you notice these are all the areas that kind of jut out a little bit. They're exposed a little bit more, so that if a hurricane were out here into the ocean waters of the Gulf of Mexico, they might have more of a brush within 85 miles of a hurricane. So that just gives you an idea. And what this tells me is just if I live anywhere along this area that's shaded, I would have some sort of a disaster plan ready. I would make sure that the family knows exactly what the plans are in case you have something like a tropical storm or a hurricane approaching. And this is the time of the year to get that supply kit ready. You may never have to use it. We hope you never have to use it. But if you have it ready, you're one step ahead of the game. We're going to take you now into the eastern Pacific. This is where things have been active. We've got another tropical depression. This is TD2E. Here in the eastern Pacific. It's moving to the west-northwest at 17 miles per hour. The central pressure 1,006 millibars. Doesn't look too terribly impressive, does it? We've even lost some of the convection with this. We do think that that west-northwestward movement will continue, and notice that this movement would tend to take it away from Mexico. So we'll hope that that continued movement does do just that and takes it away from the land masses. Let's go back to the lower 48. Boy, there's a lot to talk about here, and a new band of thunderstorms tending to move towards St. Louis, and they should reach the St. Louis area probably in the next hour to hour and a half. We've also got a few severe thunderstorms popping up into Oklahoma City. I'm going to ask my director to switch sources real quick if he could, and we'll take a peek at St. Louis. Let's hope we can do that. There it is. And you'll see these thunderstorms as they move eastward at about 30 miles per hour.